The Idries Shah Foundation podcast. Practical Psychology for Today. Featuring the works of Idries Shah, voiced by David Ault. Welcome to the Idries Shah Foundation podcast. In this edition of the podcast, we will hear selections from A Perfumed Scorpion by Idries Shah. This audio has been made available by the Idries Shah Foundation. The Invisible Teacher. I remember one such, whose supposed mystical career was attributed by him to fate for just this kind of reason. I lived quite near to him, and began to hear that he was passing on messages from an invisible teacher. One evening, however, he confessed to me that the teacher did not really exist. I said, "How could you plot such a deception? Lots of people believe you. You must be very unprincipled." "No," he said, "it is fate. I have been chosen by a strange and mysterious method. This is how it happened." He had written to someone he called a holy dervish, presumably as distinct from an unholy one, and asked him to come for a visit to speak to a group of people in his town. He had already informed everyone he could that the great man was coming, when the appointed date arrived with no answer and no dervish. The people collected, and my friends sat on a platform before them in silence, waiting. When everyone had been there some time, one of the local people stood up and said, "I have understood your meaning. The holy dervish has not come because he is invisible, and you are his representative. We accept you." "Well," continued my friend, "if that was not me being chosen as a teacher through the inner working of fate, what is? I could never have planned such a thing." In a Sufi training system, there are rules which the members are expected to follow in that part of their development which comes within their own purview. The one which is most often quoted comes from the ancient teachings of the Masters of the Design, to which my own background is referred. I find that it has direct connections with the conditions of the mind of people in both the East and West of today. Perhaps that is why the system I am about to describe is called the Everlasting Necessities. The 11 Rules of the Naqshbandiya, Masters of the Design. 11 mnemonic phrases refer to the framework within which the Sufic development takes place in the school often called the original teaching system of the Sufis. The Naqshbandiya, although they have a chain of succession of mentors, believe that not all masters were public figures, but that all teachers are in inner, call it telepathic, communication. The Naqshbandis are associated with reviving and updating the teachings periodically, being recognized as competent to interpret all forms of Sufism, being able to initiate into all orders, using ordinary clothes and entering into the ordinary activities of the world, through which they carry on part of their work, and initiating methods which others often copy as the externals of cults. In the psychological sense, the 11 rules may be looked at in this way, and the manner in which the rules are presented will vary in accordance with the state of the student's self, and also with reference to the characteristics of the culture in which the teaching is projected. 1. Awareness of breathing, linked with remembering and exercise of reaching forward for subtle perceptions. 2. Gaze on the steps, awareness of actions, watchfulness of everything which one does, concentration. 3. Travel in one's own land, exploration of the student's own mind by himself, establishing the watchfulness connected with the transformation of the self. 4. Solitude in company, the ability to remove one's consciousness from company as well as to reattach it. 5. Remembering, conceiving that there is an interrupted contact between humanity and the beyond, The posture of reaching mentally to it helps to restore the contact, dedication. 6. Restraint, literally pulling back, a technical term for prayer in a certain form. 7. Watchfulness, the exclusion of distractions and alertness for subtle perceptions. 8. Recollection, also termed noting. This stands for becoming aware of absolute truth, as in some sense present. 9. Pause of time, reprise of thought and action and other pauses in time. 10. Pause of numbers, awareness of the number of repetitions of a certain formula, certain forms of counting. 11. Pause of the heart, visualization of the heart, special exercise of an identification of the individual with the ultimate. The way in which these exercises are carried out is a matter for personal tuition. The teacher monitors and prescribes for alterations in awareness which follow these practices. They are subject to careful adjustment and cannot be automatically performed. Certain special movements and visualizations, combined with other factors, are employed in the various schemes of the Sufis to help to develop subtler stages of consciousness. Luckily, most people who involve themselves in imitations of these studies on their own initiative stay at the stage where they do little harm to themselves and to others. It is, in fact, far better that they should play at being mystics than that they should become obsessional or fall into the hands of charlatans. Beard, Cloak, and Rosary. I cannot resist thinking of ancient formulae referring to the story of the man with a bushy beard, wearing a rosary around his neck, dressed in a hooded cloak, with long and greasy hair, who was anxious, recently, to tell everyone that he was a Sufi. Someone who really was a Sufi asked him why he was behaving like that. He said, "I'm following the instructions and information contained in this ancient handbook for disciples." "But," said the real Sufi, "that cannot apply now. It was written several centuries ago." "That may well be," said the new Sufi, "but I only found it last month." The schemata just given will indicate that the Sufi approach is characterized by a systemic dealing with a succession of developments in the learner to avoid distorted results. Many of the supposedly magical and mystical procedures which are found in books, ascribed to other teachings, have been recognized by Sufis and others as having been based on a partial understanding of these processes, or one similar to them. This may reinforce the Sufi assertion that there is essentially only one method of carrying on these investigations, and that method, prominent features of which I am now citing, itself emerges from the insight obtained from penetrating beyond normal limitations. It is, in short, the original framework of what has been called the science of man, certainly for centuries before the phrase became current as the human sciences. As a recent example of this assessment, made by someone looking at Sufi ideas and practices objectively, in the sense that he is not an occultist, Orientalist, or Sufi, we can observe the view of the well-known poet Ted Hughes, who wrote, in The Listener, London, 29th of October 1964, after a consideration of the published materials, "One often comes across references to the secret doctrine, some mysterious brotherhood that is said to hold the keys to everything in the West outside Christianity, that touches the occult, tarot cards, secret societies, Rosicrucians, Masons, the Kabbalah. It is now clear that in fact all these things originated among the Sufis and represent degenerate, strayed filterings of the doctrine. Thus many forlorn puzzles in the world suddenly come into organic life." 2 points are worth making here. First, most of the external formulations referred to by Hughes, and many more, have been traced to temporary teaching groups in the Middle East by scholars and others, and the materials have been in print for a good number of years. The Sufis do not claim to have originated all of them, but they traditionally have claimed that, at the point of higher consciousness attained to by various mystical formulations, the Sufi experience and that of such other frameworks is identical. There is very little doubt, either, that this kind of grouping is to be found at the present time, in general, only in a very defective and overgrown form, as mere cults. Second, the reference to Christianity is rather wide of the mark, for the Sufi understanding of Christianity is so deep that Sufis are often called secret Christians in the East and esteem Jesus as a teacher of the path, combining the instrumental and prophetic functions. As already noted, Sufis were regarded as authorities on Christianity in the Middle Ages in the Christian West. They believe, however, that dogma and liturgy are bases, not ultimates, and that direct experience of religion is the objective of which externals are stepping stones. The cargo cult was in operation in the West long before the New Guinea people discovered it. As we continue with our consideration of Sufi theoretical and practical approaches to inner knowledge, we will be able to note two things which are of present-day interest. The first is that the setting up of a group of concepts to enable the mind to approach something can easily become, in insensitive hands, stabilized as a cult. Second, that in approaching the cultivation of deeper awareness, the Sufis have postulated and employed sequences of experiences based on the ever deeper and successively superseded ranges of understanding. In most more familiar systems we have, on the contrary, only one form of higher consciousness. For the Sufis, there are at least 5. The 5 subtleties. This brings us to the conceptual framework of the 5 subtleties. The human being is stated in Sufi presentation to contain 5 elements of the relative and 5 of the absolute. 5, that is, which belong to secondary things, referred to as the world, and 5 which are beyond limitation or dimensions, and which refer to the different manifestations of the various levels of consciousness beyond ordinarily recognizable physics. These are said to be 5 centers of spiritual perception, corresponding to these ranges of experience. They are conceived of as having physical locations in the human body. These 5 subtleties, Lataif-i Kamsa, do not exist literally. They are located in the body because the postures of extending attention to these areas are held to orientate the mind towards higher understanding and illumination. The secondary, or commanding self, which rules the personality most of the time and which provides the barrier against extra-dimensional perception, is not one of these subtle organs, but it has a location in the area of the navel. Concentration on this spot may be said to be connected with the attempt to transform this self. But we are dealing with the higher faculties. They are named as follows. Mind, on the left side, whose field is approximately where the heart is, called Qalb, the heart center. Spirit, on the right side, opposite mind. This is known as Ruh, sometimes translated as the soul center. Secret, the first stage of higher consciousness, located between the first 2, in the solar plexus. The original term is Sir, which has been called inner consciousness. Mysterious, in the forehead between the eyes and just above them. Its name is Kafi, which carries the connotation of deep secrecy. And finally comes the deeply hidden, which is resident in the brain and whose field of operation may move between the brain and the center of the chest. Its technical name is Akfa, which stands for the most hidden. The organ of stimulation of these 5 centers is the transformed consciousness, the personality originally found in the form of the commanding self, when it has been through its refining process. The concentration upon certain colors helps to awaken them. Mind is equated with yellow, spirit with red, secret, consciousness with white, mysterious with black, and deeply hidden with green. We must always remember that this is descriptive, and that the student has to go through with the experience of it. It is not enough to memorize, as many people do, this kind of material, and imagine that one knows something. It is harmful to experiment with these centers. This imagining that one has knowledge because one has a description of an instrument is common in all cultures. It is well known in the teaching of Western-type knowledge in the East, where people may take your word for things you want them to work through. What the teacher knows. In a story about this, one Eastern student said to another, "I don't think that our new American geometry teacher knows much." "How come?" asks his friend. "Well," he said, "the square on the hypotenuse of a right-angled triangle is equal to the sum of the squares on the other two sides." And I said, yes, but he couldn't have been very sure of his facts, for he then said, "Now you prove it." Just as there are several forms of consciousness which have to be awakened and experienced to avoid distortions or failure in a certain manner, carefully researched, there are 4 types of so-called miraculous happenings. Again, the Sufis, unlike other extant schools, do not merely seek wonders or label them all as significant. They work with them in accordance with certain scales of value. Wonders and miracles. First of these are those appearances which are due to works of deception, such as conjurers use, works of stealth, technically termed istidraj, successive things. Second come amazing things done by people without their knowing exactly how to do them, through the help of certain entities and influences. These works are called ma'awanat, aids. This is the lowest form of activities which appear to violate the natural order. Concentration on these things prevents higher human development. The energy going into them cannot be focused properly, and the enterprise usually degenerates into charlatanry or remains a hit-or-miss occultism. Third, we have wonder-working, karamat, which literally means something generously bestowed. These are apparent variations in physical laws, actually using unfamiliar ones, carried out in the course of the Sufi's role as someone endowed with special functions. This ability evaporates if not employed operationally. Operationally means only in accordance with the harmony of the entire Sufi phenomenon. Fourth, and finally, are what are termed real miracles. The word for them is mu'ajizat. These are true violations of natural events, carried out before witnesses by deliberate intent, by prophets, who are further defined as lawgivers. The purpose is evidentiary, as in the case of the miracles of the Old and New Testaments. The 3 kinds of operation correspond to the degree of significance and role of the human agent in question. Sleight of hand, of course, is for performers and charlatans. Assistances come to worthy people, but carry with them the probability that such undeveloped individuals will ascribe them to wild and unlikely sources. There are considerable risks of self-deception in pursuing this kind of thing. Sufi wonder-working comes about to help the Sufi in his work. It is his duty, in general, to conceal these happenings. And it is traditional also that his fellow workers and disciples should also conceal them, if they know about their ever having happened. Miracles, as such, only take place when there is a need to demonstrate a person's importance before a mass of people, or a variety of people of all kinds, so that they will listen to the message which he has for them relating to religious organization. They have never been, and are not now any part, of Sufic activity. A flowerless garden. These schemata, as I have said, part of an ongoing and complete tradition, are of little value simply on the printed page, and even less when merely adopted without the technical knowledge and total situation necessary. But to record them and display some part of the pattern is just about worthwhile. It certainly shows how other systems look like partial derivations from these very schemata. But looked at without activity, one can say of them something like that man said when he was shown a certain garden. Take away the flowers and design, and what have you got, after all? When there is a Sufi school, it has its own pace of travelling, and its carefully balanced character must be preserved. People always want more for less, always seek stimulation from materials, and hardly ever think of the enormous amount of work which lies behind many a successful human and every single spiritual operation. Going faster. I often think about a certain story when I remember that the Sufi activity must remain coherent in the sense of being one whole, which you cannot desert or simplify without dismantling it. This is why, however much you might like an easier ride with this subject, I can't give it to you. This story is about the man in a slow train which had stopped for the 100th time at a wayside station. He jumped out of his carriage and ran to the driver. "Can't you go any faster?" he roared at him. "Yes, sir, I can certainly go faster, but I'm not allowed to leave the train." Copyright 2018, the Idries Shah Foundation.